Hey, you found us.
Welcome, everybody.
This is Scripture Gems. Hello, and welcome to the show. My name is John Fullmer, and this is my brother Jay.
How's it going, John?
We are two brothers who just can't get enough of the Scriptures.
Yeah, we love them.
This episode, we are going over the Come Follow Me lesson for August 10th through 16th, 2020. This is covering Alma 53 to 63.
Whew.
And now, let's bring out the star of the show, the Scriptures. Hooray!
Looking good, Scriptures.
And now let's consult the Scripturematic 6000 to find out how long it will take to read this week's reading. Certainly can't be longer than last week.
Certainly. Woo!
What? I just replaced that vacuum tube. Oh.
Oh, boy. All right.
1 hour, 31 minutes, 33 seconds. Now, to be fair, that is shorter than last week, but not by much. This is it, people. This is the time that we've all been practicing for. 13 minutes a day. You can do this. You did it last week.
Yeah.
You can do it again this week. And I want to just give you this encouragement. If you can get through this week, we're not going to have another reading assignment that's longer than an hour for the rest of the year. So this is the time to buckle down. You get the reading in, and there's so much good reading.
Oh, my goodness. And, you know, it's summertime. What a great time.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, get out in the hammock and read your Scriptures.
Sounds good.
Now, hey, John, what happened last week?
Last week on Scripture Gems, Amalickiah uses treachery, murder, and intrigue to become a king of the Lamanites and uses them to attack the Nephites with some success. The Nephites, led by the mighty Captain Moroni, are able to reclaim one city, but many more are in Amalickiah's clutches. But his reign of terror comes to an end at the point of Tiancum's javelin. Now his brother Amaron carries on his wicked war. Can he be stopped? Stay tuned and see.
Oh, that was really good.
You know,
I want to stay tuned and see.
Thanks for humoring us, guys. So,
All right.
Alma 53. Moroni sets his guard over the Lamanite prisoners and tasks the prisoners with burying the dead of both the Lamanites and the Nephites. This keeps them busy, so they're easier to guard. It's a good thing.
Yeah.
Lehi takes control over Mulek.
Oh, boy.
So Mulek is in great hands.
I don't think we ever see an account of him having anything but success.
No, he's the rock here.
Yeah, now when Tiancum takes the Lamanite prisoners back to Bountiful and causes them to build this fortification of Bountiful that is unlike any of the other fortifications that we hear about. It's described here as a ditch with breastwork of timbers on the inner part of the bank. Now, he said that they built it to an exceeding height. Now, a breastwork of timbers means timbers that come up to your chest. So I think that the structure of this looks something like this. And what's amazing is that as you do each layer, you would think, well, gosh, you're filling in the ditch you just dug, and now you've got to do that. But they've got prisoners, and they're trying to give them busy work to keep them occupied. So it doesn't matter whether or not you have to keep redigging that ditch and throwing up new mounds. But look at what it accomplishes. There's, again, nothing like these fortifications anywhere else listed in Book of Mormon lands. So they did great work, these Lamanite prisoners.
Indeed. Now, there are no more battles for the rest of the year. We're only focusing on preparing for war, fortifications. So that's kind of a good thing.
Right.
But due to internal dissensions among the Nephites, in the absence of Moroni, the Lamanites gain more ground on the West Sea South, so the opposite end of the border.
All right, and we should be clear that we've got this week we're going to be talking about two battlefronts. We've got the east, on the east seashore, and we've got the battle on the West Sea South. So there's attacks happening on two different areas, and we will be going back and forth between those two.
Right. And predominantly right now, we have Moroni and Tiancum and Lehi on the east. We have Helaman and Antipas on the west, but we'll go over that more later.
Mm-hmm.
So what's interesting is this dissension among the Nephites. There was a great quote that I found in the Institute manual from Hugh Nibley's book, Since Cumorah, where he explains, quote, "So it was a blessing to the Nephites after all to have the Lamanites on their doorstep to stir them up to remembrance. Happy is the man whom God correcteth. No matter how wicked and ferocious and depraved the Lamanites might be, and they were that, no matter by how much they outnumbered the Nephites, darkly closing in on all sides, no matter how insidiously they spied and intrigued and infiltrated and hatched their diabolical plots and breathed their bloody threats and pushed their formidable preparations for all-out war, they were not the Nephite problem. They were merely kept there to remind the Nephites of their real problem, which was to walk uprightly before the Lord. End quote.
That's an important thing to remember as we're going forward, because that really plays out.
Right. It's not so much a victim of circumstance. They need to remember in whom they should be trusting. So let's get into chapter 53. This started verse 10. Mormon's going to tell us about the formation of the famous army of Helaman. And now behold, I have somewhat to say concerning the people of Ammon, who in the beginning were Lamanites. But by Ammon and his brethren, or rather by the power and word of God, they had been converted unto the Lord. And they had been brought down into the land of Zarahemla, and had ever since been protected by the Nephites. And because of their oath, they had been kept from taking up arms against their brethren. For they had taken an oath that they never would shed blood more, and according to their oath, they would have perished. Yea, they would have suffered themselves to have fallen into the hands of their brethren, had it not been for the pity and exceeding love which Ammon and his brethren had had for them. And for this cause they were brought down into the land of Zarahemla, and they ever had been protected by the Nephites. But it came to pass that when they saw the danger and the many afflictions and tribulations which the Nephites bore for them, they were moved with compassion, and were desirous to take up arms in the defense of their country. But behold, as they were about to take their weapons of war, they were overpowered by the persuasions of Helaman and his brethren, for they were about to break the oath which they had made.
This is significant. Look at what's happening here. Here we have really good people who want to do something good, but to do that, they would break an oath that they made to God. Is it okay to break an oath to God if it's for a good reason? So they're having a hard time watching the people whom they love go through such a hardship. And yet, as we're going to find out, they had to. They just had to watch them wade through their afflictions.
Well, and one of the things to bear in mind here, too, is that this was not a commandment of the church. This was not something that the leaders of the church at the time said to all the Nephites, hey,
sure,
you can't use your weapons of war to kill anybody. Okay? This was a special covenant that these people had made directly with God. And yeah, it was important, and it was that important.
It was, and Helaman understood that. It's hard to want to look down on what they're doing, but we've talked about this idea before. We need to ask a question when we want to do something that seems virtuous. If it seems virtuous or compassionate, right, where is it taking you? In this case, there's nothing wrong with what they want to do, except it would take them away from the promise they made with God. And so what's fascinating is what we're going to see is that the fathers keeping their covenants is going to do more to bless the Nephites than if they took up weapons and came to fight. And I think Mormon is kind of describing that as he goes on. But watch for that. Even though it seems like, well, I could do this or I could do this, keep your covenants. That will do more than anything to bless the lives of your family and those around you.
Absolutely. In verse 15, and Helaman feared lest by so doing they should lose their souls. Therefore all those who had entered into this covenant were compelled to behold their brethren wade through their afflictions in their dangerous circumstances at this time. But behold, it came to pass that they had many sons who had not entered into a covenant, that they would not take their weapons of war to defend themselves against their enemies. Therefore they did assemble themselves together at this time, as many as were able to take up arms, and they called themselves Nephites. And they entered into a covenant to fight for the liberty of the Nephites, yea, to protect the land unto the laying down of their lives. Yea, even they covenanted that they never would give up their liberty, but they would fight in all cases to protect the Nephites and themselves from bondage. Now behold, there were 2,000 of those young men who entered into this covenant, and took their weapons of war to defend their country. And now behold, as they never had hitherto been a disadvantage to the Nephites, they became now at this period of time also a great support. For they took their weapons of war, and they would that Helaman should be their leader.
So what does that tell us about them, about their character? That these young men would choose as their leader the prophet, the head of the church. Yeah. Think about that. Who do we choose today to be our leader in the war that we are fighting? Who's our leader? And yet these young men, I think it really does. It says something about your character in the leader that you choose.
Well, and we'll get more and more insights into the character of these young men. But the next couple of verses gives us a little taste. Verse 20, and they were all young men, and they were exceedingly valiant for courage, and also for strength and activity. But behold, this was not all. They were men who were true at all times, in whatsoever thing they were entrusted. Yea, they were men of truth and soberness, for they had been taught to keep the commandments of God and to walk uprightly before him. Interesting, the use of the word soberness. Remember our discussion of sober with Alma's discussion with Helaman and Shiblon? This is almost a notion of bridling your passions, focusing.
Yeah. And true at all times. That means at nighttime when no one else is around and you have the computer alone, at times when people can't see what you're texting, when you're covered with anonymity on the internet, all times these men were true in whatsoever thing they were entrusted.
And along that line, and the previous discussion about keeping your covenants with God, there was a quote in the Institute Manual from Elder M. Russell Ballard from April 1999 General Conference. He says, quote, sometimes we are tempted to let ourselves be governed more by convenience than by covenant. It is not always convenient to live gospel standards and stand up for truth and testify of the restoration. But there is no spiritual power in living by convenience. The power comes as we keep our covenants, end quote.
And boy, is this demonstrated well as we go forward.
To finish the chapter, Helaman takes command of the 2,000 stripling warriors. They go to the West Sea on the Lamanite borders to help Antipas. This is the end of the 28th year of the reign of the judges. So now we go on to chapter 54. So now Moroni gets a message from Amaron, the leader of the Lamanites, asking if he would like to exchange prisoners. And Moroni is excited because he's been using a lot of his resources to sustain the Lamanite prisoners, and he'd rather use that to strengthen his own people, and plus he'd like to have some of his soldiers back. But the Nephites only captured male soldiers. The Lamanites captured male soldiers and women and children.
And this makes sense because they are invading the homeland, so they're only sending the male soldiers out, and they'll capture whoever they want to.
Exactly. So Moroni sends a message back with Amaron's servant.
And it reads like this in verse 5. Behold, Amaron, I have written unto you somewhat concerning this war which ye have waged against my people, or rather which thy brother hath waged against them, and which ye are still determined to carry on after his death. Behold, I would tell you somewhat concerning the justice of God, and the sword of his almighty wrath, which doth hang over you, except ye repent, and withdraw your armies into your own lands, or the lands of your possessions, which is the land of Nephi. As a break, I think it's interesting that he points out these didn't used to be Amaron's own lands. He grew up with the Nephites. So how he changes that to the lands of your possessions. In other words, okay, well, you own them now, but they weren't originally your own lands.
Well, and there's certainly some irony to the fact that he's saying that your land is the land of Nephi, which the Nephites were chased out of
Yeah.
way back a few hundred years ago. But that's the way it is now.
Right. Verse 7. Yea, I would tell you these things if you were capable of hearkening unto them. Yea, I would tell you concerning that awful hell that awaits to receive such murderers as thou and thy brother have been, except ye repent and withdraw your murderous purposes, and return with your armies to your own lands. But as ye have once rejected these things, and have fought against the people of the Lord, even so I may expect you will do it again. And now we are prepared to receive you, yea, and except you withdraw your purposes, behold, ye will pull down the wrath of that God whom you have rejected upon you, even to your utter destruction. But as the Lord liveth, our armies shall come upon you, except ye withdraw, and ye shall soon be visited with death. For we will retain our cities and our lands, yea, we will maintain our religion and the cause of our God. But behold, it supposeth me that I talk to you concerning these things in vain, or it supposeth me that thou art a child of hell. Therefore I will close my epistle by telling you that I will not exchange prisoners, save it be on conditions that ye will deliver up a man and his wife and his children for one prisoner. If this be the case, that ye will do it, I will exchange. And behold, if ye do not this, I will come against you with my armies. Yea, even I will arm my women and my children, and I will come against you, and I will follow you even into your own land, which is the land of our first inheritance. Yea, and it shall be blood for blood, yea, life for life, and I will give you battle even until you are destroyed from off the face of the earth. Behold, I am in my anger, and also my people. Ye have sought to murder us, and we have only sought to defend ourselves. But behold, if ye seek to destroy us more, we will seek to destroy you, and we will seek our land, the land of our first inheritance. Now I close my epistle. I am Moroni. I am a leader of the people of the Nephites.
Whew!
Well, how would you respond to a letter like that?
Well, I think probably similar to the way Ammoron did, unfortunately. Verse 16, we get Ammoron's reply. I am Ammoron, the king of the Lamanites. I am the brother of Amalickiah, whom ye have murdered. Behold, I will avenge his blood upon you. Yea, and I will come upon you with my armies, for I fear not your threatenings. For behold, your fathers did wrong their brethren, insomuch that they did rob them of their right to the government, when it rightly belonged unto them. And now behold, if ye will lay down your arms, and subject yourselves to be governed by those whom the government doth rightly belong, then will I cause that my people shall lay down their weapons, and shall be at war no more. Behold, ye have breathed out many threatenings against me and my people, but behold, we fear not your threatenings. Nevertheless, I will grant to exchange prisoners according to your request gladly, that I may preserve my food for my men of war. And we will wage a war which shall be eternal, either to the subjecting the Nephites to our authority, or to their eternal extinction. And as concerning that God whom ye say we have rejected, behold, we know not such a being, neither do ye. But if it so be that there is such a being, we know not but that he hath made us as well as you. And if it so be that there is a devil and a hell, behold, will he not send you there to dwell with my brother, whom ye have murdered, whom ye have hinted that he hath gone to such a place? But behold, these things matter not. I am Ammoron, and a descendant of Zoram, whom your fathers pressed and brought out of Jerusalem. And behold, now I am a bold Lamanite. Behold, this war hath been waged to avenge their wrongs, and to maintain and to obtain their rights to the government. And I close my epistle to Moroni.
What?
Ouch.
First of all, can I just say, he revisits it again at the end. But look at this. In verse 17, for behold, your fathers did wrong their brethren. He's talking about the Lamanites as, the Lamanites were wronged. insomuch that they did rob them from the right of government when it rightly belonged to them. So he's saying they should have that right to government. Well, who's governing? A Zoramite, who was a Nephite. So the Nephite is governing, saying, you guys have wronged them. They should have the government back. By the way, I'm going to continue to rule. So he's as hypocritical as possibly could be here.
You know, that's interesting. I didn't make this comparison before, and I don't mean to always go back to World War II, but that was one of the things that was always funny to me, is that Hitler was such a proponent of the Aryan race when he himself was not a member of said race. I just thought that was interesting, and this is a similar thing.
Wow. Yeah, my gosh, that's so horrible. It's so horrible.
Yeah, it really is. Well, that takes us into chapter 55.
Okay, and then we get Moroni's response to Amaron's letter, starting in verse 1.
I'm sure it'll be fine.
I'm sure. Now it came to pass that when Moroni had received this epistle, he was more angry, because he knew that Amaron had a perfect knowledge of his fraud. Yea, he knew that Amaron knew that it was not a just cause that had caused him to wage a war against the people of Nephi.
All right, quick aside here. I want to point out that let's remember that Amaron's brother is Amalickiah. He is Mr. Fraud.
Right.
We went through last lesson how he manipulated the system to become the ruler of the Lamanites. So yeah, I'm sure his brother knew exactly what was going on.
Yeah. Verse 2, and he said, Behold, I will not exchange prisoners with Amaron, save he will withdraw his purpose, as I have stated in my epistle. For I will not grant unto him that he shall have any more power than what he hath got. Behold, I know the place where the Lamanites do guard my people whom they have taken prisoners. And as Amaron would not grant unto me mine epistle, behold, I will give unto him according to my words. Yea, I will seek death among them until they shall sue for peace.
Ooh.
Well, that doesn't sound like the Moroni we're used to.
Well, he's letting his passions go, certainly.
Oh, he's so frustrated.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is saying that phrase, I will seek death among the Lamanites until they shall sue for peace. In other words, so they shall beg for peace. Well, look at the very next thing he does. He says that, and then he does, starting in verse 4. And now it came to pass that when Moroni had said these words, he caused that a search should be made among his men, that perhaps he might find a man who was a descendant of Laman among them. He's about to lay out a plan that will allow them to rescue the Nephite prisoners without shedding any Lamanite blood, which is hilarious. So that's why he's looking for this guy. But notice here, it says that he's looking for a descendant of Laman. He doesn't say he's looking for a Lamanite. That's different. By this point in history, there just isn't such a thing as, a Lamanite Nephite. We've had so many Nephites that have joined the Lamanites and Lamanites that have joined the Nephites. And even if there was any kind of a differentiation between them at the beginning, which I'm not sure there was, there certainly isn't now. It's not relevant now. Except, why is he looking for a descendant of Laman specifically? And again, it's not noticeable enough that he needs to search in order to find somebody that's like that. It's not like, back in the day when we would watch the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and you'd see Alex Boyer in there. He'd be this one little black face in the midst of this sea of white.
Right.
You don't have to search if there was that kind of a difference. So he's searching for specifically some characteristics. Let's take a look at what they might be. And it came to pass that they found one, whose name was Laman. All right, do you remember Laman from last week? We spent time talking about him. It says he was one of the servants of the king who was murdered by Amalickiah. This was the guy we talked about who had this undying hatred for the people of Ammon, and must have, because the people of Ammon left and he stayed there. He may have been one of the guys fighting against them in Alma 28 in this massive battle. He was this elite guard of the king. He was framed for the king's murder, and he had nowhere else to go. He joined the people of Ammon. We talked about the possibility of when he may have joined Captain Moroni's army, and I suggested that the rebellion of the kingmen, when Amalickiah began to take control of cities, he may at that point have said, oh, no, you don't. I couldn't do anything to stop you last time, but I'm going to do something this time. I have a unique set of skills. So he joined, and we find him on the east where Amalickiah was, and he may have even been a captain. Notice this in verse 6. Now Moroni caused that Laman and a small number of his men. Well, the last name that was given was Laman. So they could have been Captain Moroni's men, but they could also be Laman's men. We know there's lots of different levels of captains. Should go forth unto the guards who were over the Nephites. In verse 7, now the Nephites were guarded in the city of Gid. Therefore Moroni appointed Laman, and caused that a small number of men should go with him. And when it was evening, and this is another reason why it doesn't really matter what this guy may look like. Although, when you have a descendant of Laman, you've got someone who grew up in that lifestyle, who knows how to wear his hair, who knows how to put on war paint, who knows how to walk, who knows the slang, who knows everything about what's happening there. But notice it's at the time of evening when Laman went to the guards who were over the Nephites at the city of Gid. And behold, they saw him coming and hailed him, but he saith unto them, Fear not, behold, I am a Lamanite. That's the first moment that they would have been able to tell whether they should be suspicious or not, when they heard his voice. Imagine how important it is to have someone who knows exactly what to say with no accent and knows all the slang. I mean, imagine you're an American army and you have somebody marching up to you and say, something like, Hey, buddies, it is I, an American. Right, cowboys? Howdy, howdy, howdy. Let us drink wine and watch a sports team match now, yes?
Right.
Now, he's speaking the language, more or less. And I know that's over the top, but if you start to even get any suspicion that this is a ruse, this guy, not only did he know the language perfectly and could speak it perfectly and knew how to behave, but he was an elite guard. Does he know guards? He knows guards. He knows exactly what to say and how to manipulate them. And that's why it's such a genius move by Captain Moroni to bring him in, because he's not just a placeholder, a warm body for this plan. He makes it happen. So let's watch what he does. It goes on in the rest of verse 8. Behold, so he announces who he is. He says, I'm a Lamanite. Behold, we've escaped from the Nephites, and they sleep. And behold, we've taken their wine and brought with us. Now the Lamanites, when the Lamanites heard these words, they received him with joy. And they said unto him, Give us of your wine that we may drink. We are glad that ye have thus taken wine with you, for we are weary. But Laman said unto them, Let us keep of our wine until we go against the Nephites to battle. But this saying only made them more desirous to drink of the wine. Now, do you think Laman knew that? Do you think Laman knew that if he said that, it would have exactly that response? I think so. For, said they, We are weary, therefore let us take of the wine, and by we shall receive wine for our rations, which will strengthen us to go against the Nephites. And Laman said unto them, You may do according to your desires. And it came to pass that they did take of the wine freely, and it was pleasant to their taste. Therefore they took of it more freely, and it was strong, having been prepared in its strength. And it came to pass that they did drink and were merry, and by they were all drunken. And now, when Laman and his men saw that they were all drunken and were in a deep sleep, they returned to Moroni and told him all the things that had happened. Now this was according to the design of Moroni. Remember, this is the guy who said, I will seek death among them until they shall sue for peace. And Moroni had prepared his men with weapons of war, and he went to the city of Gid while the Lamanites were in a deep sleep and drunken, and cast in weapons of war unto the prisoners, insomuch that they were all armed, yea, even to their women and all those of their children, as many as were able to use a weapon of war. When Moroni had armed all those prisoners, and all those things were done in a profound silence. But had they awakened the Lamanites, behold, they were drunken, and the Nephites could have slain them. But behold, this was not the desire of Moroni. He did not delight in murder or bloodshed, but he delighted in the saving of his people from destruction. I love him so much. Let's take a look in verse 22. Now behold, this was done in the nighttime, so that when the Lamanites awoke in the morning, they beheld that they were surrounded by the Nephites without, and that their prisoners were armed within. And thus they saw that the Nephites had power over them. And in these circumstances, they found that it was not expedient that they should fight with the Nephites. I'm just imagining, like, whoever their leader is looking around, being totally hungover and seeing this situation and going, fellas, in these circumstances, I find that it's not expedient that we should fight with you guys at this time.
I don't think he was that verbal.
He might have. That's my version of it. Therefore, their chief captains demanded their weapons of war, and they brought them forth and cast them, I imagine, quietly at the feet of the Nephites, because they were still hungover.
They were hungover, yeah.
Pleading for mercy. Verse 24, now behold, this was the desire of Moroni. He took them prisoners of war, and took possession of the city, and caused that all the prisoners should be liberated, who were Nephites, and they did join the army of Moroni, and were a great strength to his army. What's amazing about Laman's story, to me, is what we've covered of it going up to this point. He's in the army now. He is using his skills. He manipulates these guys, but not just to free the prisoners. He manipulates them so that he can save them, because what's the alternative? They'd have to kill them all. But because of what he did, he saved these Lamanites' life. And I like to imagine Laman standing there. I did this drawing of the guys kind of waking up and everybody with weapons. And Laman standing there looking at them, his arms folded. Maybe they recognize him and like, oh, man. But he's looking at them like, just wait. Just wait until you get to know these guys. Just wait until you understand what their God teaches them to do and how to live. Because these prisoners are going to be headed right up to Bountiful and join all the other Lamanite prisoners. And we will find out at the end of our lesson today what happens to those prisoners whose lives Laman saved.
I wonder sometimes during that whole episode if Laman and his men didn't drink wine as well. I mean, I would think they would need to keep themselves sober. But you would think that the Lamanite guards might think, hey, we're drinking a lot of this wine. They're not drinking anything.
No, they might just be doing that little sip thing you do when you're being polite,
or tossing it over their shoulder or something like that. Or maybe they passed it out, as if they had become drunken, but maybe didn't. I don't know.
I'm sure they knew exactly what parts to play. The men that went with Laman, whether they were Laman's men or whether they were Captain Moroni's men, they would have been chosen specifically to be able to play this up. Yeah. And those characters. The guys you could depend on for specific tasks. And I'm sure these guys were picked for that task.
I need someone to fake that he's drunk. Ooh, I can. I'm not sure how that meeting went down.
That's awesome.
So let's finish out the chapter, 55. Moroni causes the Lamanite prisoners to fortify Gid and then sends them to Bountiful, as Jay had mentioned. The Nephites start succeeding.
Yay.
They start seeing some success in reclaiming their land. The Lamanites try to lay siege to the Nephites to circle about them at night, but each time they tried, they lost more soldiers to become prisoners. Also, many times the Lamanites attempted the Nephite trick of making the guards drunk or poisoning them, but the Nephites were hearkening to the Lord. They gave the wine first to the Lamanite prisoners to test it. So they kept themselves mindful of the Lord and temperate and wise. Moroni sets his sights to reclaim Morianton, which the Lamanites had made into, quote, an exceeding stronghold. And so this is the end of the 29th year of the reign of the judges. And just so that we're caught up here, the 30th year of the reign of the judges is approximately 63 BC. This is when, in the old world, the Roman general Pompey the Great lays siege to Jerusalem and successfully conquers it for Rome.
Now, that brings us to Alma 56. This is a letter from Helaman to Moroni, and that'll take us through chapters 56, 57, and 58. There's a lot in here, so we're going to have to summarize a lot, but I hope we can give you the pieces that will help to tie these events together. Before we talked about the concern about the people of Ammon, the fathers wanting to break their covenant. Well, that was Mormon's summary of what was going on. We get this in verse 7 and verse 8 from Helaman himself. He says they were about, in verse 7, to break their covenant. In verse 8, Helaman and his people knew that God would strengthen them even if they didn't have these guys fight, just by keeping their covenants. So Helaman takes charge of, in verse 9, these 2,000 young men of the people of Ammon, and they come to the city of Judea to assist Antipas. Now, I want to introduce you to Antipas here a bit. Antipas, notice at the end of verse 9, was appointed a leader. This guy took on a responsibility. He didn't say, pick me, pick me. He was appointed a leader. And let's look through these next verses at his situation, because to me, he's one of the great heroes of this. We often only focus on Helaman and the 2,000, but look for who was in charge of everything and the man who protected the 2,000, even with his life. So we meet him in verse 9. In verse 10, we see some aspects of what's going on there. Antipas is very excited to have these forces, these 2,000, even though these are young men who'd never fought before, because his army, in the middle of verse 10, has been reduced by the Lamanites because of their forces. Their forces had been slain. And in verse 12, we find that the Lamanites had also retained these prisoners of the Nephites, but the only prisoners they're keeping are chief captains. Remember, there's different levels of captains. Well, they're not keeping soldiers. They're not keeping the lower captains. They're only keeping chief captains. And to what end? They don't know. We don't know. It says that if they're alive, they're still in the land of Nephi, but they don't know what's happened to them. It sounds to me like these are trophies. In some ancient American cultures, they would sacrifice military trophies to their gods. So this may have been a grisly end for these poor chief captains. Verse 14 gives us an idea of all that's been lost. The Lamanites control Manti, Zeezrom, Cumeni, Antipara, and these are the cities which were possessed when Helaman arrived in verse 15.
I'd like to point out how cool it is that Zeezrom got a city named after him.
Yes, it is.
Good job, Zeezrom.
I'd like to meet these other guys too.
Oh, yeah.
So when Helaman arrived in verse 15, he found that Antipas and his men were toiling with their might to fortify the city. And this is Judea we're talking about. And just look at the condition of these guys. And these are guys who have given so much. They were depressed in body as well as in spirit, for they had fought valiantly by day and toiled by night to maintain their cities. And thus they had suffered great afflictions of every kind. But look in verse 17. Now they were determined to conquer. So these are fantastic, amazing men who are doing this, but they are in bad shape. So here comes Helaman with his 2,000. It's the first ray of hope they've had in a long time. And at the end of 17, it says, those sons of mine gave them great hopes and much joy. What a beautiful thing. But yes, it is a difficult situation that they find themselves in right now. So the Lamanite response, when they saw Helaman's army coming, they backed off. They would not attack Judea. So they thought better of it, which was great. But they were maintaining the cities which they had conquered. In verse 22, we see that Nephites sent spies out to make sure that the Lamanites weren't trying to sneak past them, because they are on that west sea south. Judea is placed in such a way that they are the entryway into the heartland of Zarahemla. So they need to make sure nobody's getting past them. And by verse 28, we see that we have an additional 2,000 men sent from Zarahemla. So now they've got 10,000 units that they are able to work with to maintain that city and maybe to take back some other cities. And the Lamanites began to get nervous about this. They tried little attacks to prevent additional forces and provisions from being received, but it didn't help. So that brings us to verse 30. And this is where we begin a plan. And notice who came up with the plan. In verse 30, Antipas ordered the plan. So here it is. Helaman is going to march forth with his 2,000. And they're going to march past the city of Antipara as if they were going to a city beyond. We don't know the name of this city, but it's right on the seashore. They're just headed right that direction, and it's too tempting. Now, you might be saying, hey, wait a minute. Captain Moroni did this plan before with Teancum and Lehi. Yeah, he did. But that was happening on the east. This is happening on the west. It's interesting that both people came up with these ideas separately, and they both were successful.
Yeah, it's important for us to remember that communications were not nearly as robust and as immediate as they are today.
Well, for sure. And it's also important to remember that what we're reading right now was happening at the same time as the events that we had just been talking about on the East Coast. And you can see here what's happening during those time periods. So they march past, and again, the same thing. The Lamanites are thinking, we could take these guys, let's do it. And just for the sake of power over them, just for the sake of greed, they go out, they leave their city, the safety of their city. Now, as they tempted this army out of the city of Antipara, they began to march forth and chase this little band, this little group of 2,000 young warriors. In verse 33, it came to pass that Antipas did march forth with a part of his army. So now we've got the plan in place. Antipas is going to come up in the rear, and the problem is that the army in Antipara in 34, now in the city of Antipara were stationed the strongest army of the Lamanites, yea, the most numerous. So when they realized by their spies that Antipas was marching against them, they began to speed up their march. So the goal seemed to be that if they could capture the 2,000 and destroy them, then they wouldn't be surrounded. They could then handle Antipas. So in 37, the army of Antipas is pursuing them. And in 38, Antipas, when he sees their danger, he sees that, oh no, that Lamanite army, that massive, powerful Lamanite army, could overwhelm and destroy these young men. Antipas did speed his march. Now, you might say, well, but we know that the stripling warriors can't be killed because of their faithfulness. But I'm not sure that was well understood. In 39, Helaman says, we were not sufficiently strong to contend with them.
Well, and we still haven't had them in battle yet.
Right.
They have not witnessed the miraculous protection that they're about to have.
Yeah, and Helaman goes on to say, I would not suffer that my little son should fall into their hands. But you know who else wouldn't allow that? Antipas. Antipas pushed his men and pushed himself so that they could bridge that distance. With the Lamanite army running out at full speed, he was going to make sure that those 2,000 young men were not destroyed. So this is how it runs out the first day. In the morning, the Lamanites are on them again. They take off. That happens all the next day. Here we've got everybody running, and Antipas is in the back trying to bridge the distance. By the third morning, they wake up, and Helaman realizes nobody's chasing them. So why not? Why aren't the Lamanites chasing them anymore? They don't know. Is it a trap? Did Antipas catch up with them? What's happening? So we have that exploration here. Let's take a look in 43. And now, whether they were overtaken by Antipas, we knew not. But I said unto my men, behold, we know not, but they have halted for the purpose that we should come against them, that they might catch us in their snare. Therefore, what say ye, my sons? Will ye go against them to battle? Now remember, this is a letter that he's writing to Moroni. And now I say unto you, my beloved brother Moroni, that never had I seen so great courage, nay, not amongst all the Nephites. For as I had ever called them my sons, for they were all of them very young, even so they said unto me, Father, behold, our God is with us, and he will not suffer that we should fall. Then let us go forth. We would not slay our brethren if they would let us alone. Therefore let us go, lest they should overpower the army of Antipas. Now they never had fought, yet they did not fear death, and they did think more upon the liberty of their fathers than they did upon their own lives. Yea, they had been taught by their mothers that if they did not doubt, God would deliver them. And they rehearsed unto me the words of their mothers, saying, We do not doubt our mothers knew it.
That's always an amazing story, and certainly a tribute to the importance of parents, particularly mothers. There's a quote from the Institute Manual from October 2007 General Conference from Sister Julie B. Beck, the Relief Society General President at the time. She said, quote, "In the Book of Mormon, we read about 2,000 exemplary young men who were exceedingly valiant, courageous, and strong. Yea, they were men of truth and soberness, for they had been taught to keep the commandments of God and to walk uprightly before him. These faithful young men paid tribute to their mothers. They said, 'Our mothers knew it.' The responsibility mothers have today has never required more vigilance. More than at any time in the history of the world, we need mothers who know. When mothers know who they are and who God is, and have made covenants with him, they will have great power and influence for good on their children." End quote.
Amen to that.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a look at what happens. In verse 49, they returned, these 2,000, and look at what they see. And now behold, the armies of Antipas had overtaken them, and a terrible battle had commenced. Verse 50, the army of Antipas being weary because of their long march in so short a space of time, they were about to fall into the hands of the Lamanites. In verse 51, for behold, Antipas had fallen, and many of his leaders because of their weariness. These men gave everything to protect these young men, and yet these young men now return and rescue what remains of Antipas's army. I don't know if any of us have heard of Antipas, but he's a hero of mine because he's served in a quiet way. He doesn't have the fame of Moroni or Tiancum or Captain Lehi, but he fought and gave everything in the job and task that was appointed to him. And I celebrate him for what he gave. Now, I know it's exciting to look at the heroism of the 2,000 who saved the rest of the army, but I'm grateful for what Antipas teaches me about service, which is why I get all emotional whenever I talk about him. So this is the remarkable thing. Here are the Lamanites. They're conquering this poor army of Antipas. And these 2,000, look at the verse 52. Helaman came upon their rear with his 2,000 and began to slay them exceedingly, insomuch that the whole army of the Lamanites halted and turned upon Helaman. They slammed into the rear of that army so powerfully that everybody had to turn and contend with them. Now, when the people of Antipas saw that the Lamanites had turned about, well, now they began to take over. And now we've got these two forces working together in unity, and the Lamanites are horrified at what happens, and they deliver up their weapons of war.
They're surrounded. And let me read the last few verses of the chapter, starting with verse 55. "And now it came to pass that when they had surrendered themselves up unto us, behold, I numbered those young men who had fought with me, fearing lest there were many of them slain. But behold, to my great joy, there had not one soul of them fallen to the earth. Yea, and they had fought as if with the strength of God. Yea, never were men known to have fought with such miraculous strength. And with such mighty power did they fall upon the Lamanites, and they did frighten them. And for this cause did the Lamanites deliver themselves up as prisoners of war. And as we had no place for our prisoners, that we could guard them to keep them from the armies of the Lamanites, therefore we sent them to the land of Zarahemla, and a part of those men who were not slain of Antipas with them. And the remainder I took and joined them to my stripling Ammonites, and took our march back to the city of Judea." So he never officially says it, but it would appear that with the death of Antipas, Helaman takes over the forces in the west.
Yeah, so it seems. And you know what's great, though? This is the strongest of the Lamanite armies. And yet these 2,000 young men who had never fought, but came at them with the power of God, frightened them so much that they gave up. Oh, wow. That's inspiring.
It really is. So let's move on to 57. What else happens? Well, Amaron wants to exchange prisoners with Helaman.
Now remember, we're still on the west-south battle, so Amaron apparently was negotiating on both fronts.
Right. I don't know timing-wise how that fits, but, similar time.
Yeah.
Amaron wants to exchange prisoners. Helaman boldly declines. And this is one of the more humorous responses, I think. Starting in verse 1, "And now it came to pass that I received an epistle from Amaron, the king, stating that if I would deliver up those prisoners of war whom we had taken, that he would deliver up the city of Antipara unto us. But I sent an epistle unto the king that we were sure our forces were sufficient to take the city of Antipara by our force. And by delivering up the prisoners for that city, we should suppose ourselves unwise, and that we would only deliver up our prisoners on exchange. And Amaron refused mine epistle, for he would not exchange prisoners. Therefore we began to make preparations to go against the city of Antipara. But the people of Antipara did leave the city, and fled to their other cities, which they had possession of, to fortify them. And thus the city of Antipara fell into our hands. And thus ended the 28th year of the reign of the judges." So it would seem that Helaman was right, although he didn't really need to exert much force. Evidently, the people in Antipara were afraid of his army too.
Yeah.
So going on, in the beginning of the 29th year of the reign of the judges, they received provisions and 6,000 men from Zarahemla, plus 60 more Ammonite sons. So now the people of Ammon, the sons of the people of Ammon, are now up to 2,060, but we're never called the army of 2,060 because that's not as round a number. So the Nephites lay siege to Cumeni. The Lamanites try to break the siege by attacking at night, but as many times as they attempted this, their blood was spilt. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with warfare tactics, to lay siege is to place your army around a city or a land and prevent any resources from coming in or going out, and basically starving the city.
Yeah.
So that's what they're doing. Provisions arrive for the Lamanites in Cumeni, but are intercepted by the Nephites, as the siege would normally do. So these provisions that they captured, they send to Judea, and any Lamanite prisoners to Zarahemla. After, quote, "not many days," the Lamanites in Cumeni surrender to the siege. There were too many prisoners, though, because this was not a war, this was not a battle. They just captured everybody.
Yeah, right.
And so what happened was when they tried to escort these to Zarahemla, there would be large groups that would attempt to break out. And so they ended up attacking them, and they ended up killing 2,000 of them.
Yeah, after they had surrendered.
Right. So now after we settled things down and there weren't groups of people trying to break away, a group of Nephite soldiers are tasked with taking all of the Lamanite prisoners to Zarahemla. But they return the next day, and it should have taken a lot longer than that. Helaman doesn't know why it took them such a short time, but he also was concerned more with the Lamanite attack. They were under attack at this point, and the return of those soldiers was actually welcome. They really needed the help. Verse 19, "But behold, my little band of 2,060 fought most desperately. Yea, they were firm before the Lamanites, and did administer death unto all those who opposed them. And as the remainder of our army were about to give way before the Lamanites, behold, those 2,060 were firm and undaunted. Yea, and they did obey and observe to perform every word of command with exactness. Yea, and even according to their faith it was done unto them. And I did remember the words which they said unto me, that their mothers had taught them. And now behold, it was these my sons, and those men who had been selected to convey the prisoners, to whom we owe this great victory. For it was they who did beat the Lamanites, therefore they were driven back to the city of Manti, and we retained our city Cumeni, and were not all destroyed by the sword. Nevertheless, we had suffered great loss." So the Lamanites attacked Cumeni, but with the strength of the armies of Helaman, the stripling warriors, and the Nephite force coming back from Zarahemla much earlier than expected, they were able to repulse the attack. Verse 24, and it came to pass that after the Lamanites had fled, I immediately gave orders that my men who had been wounded should be taken from among the dead, and caused that their wounds should be dressed. And it came to pass that there were 200 out of my 2,060 who had fainted because of the loss of blood. Nevertheless, according to the goodness of God, and to our great astonishment, and also the joy of our whole army, there was not one soul of them who did perish. Yea, and neither was there one soul among them who had not received many wounds.
Hey, a quick note on that. Occasionally we get this phrase that someone has fainted from loss of blood, and we may not appreciate what that means exactly. It's harder to do this visually here on the screen. It's easier in real life, but look at this little bottle. That's a fair amount of blood. If you were to splatter that blood on the table, that would be significant. That's not enough to faint from loss of blood. And what about this soda can? If this soda can was filled with blood, now imagine that's your blood and you lost that much blood, wouldn't you sit down and go, okay, I'm going to take a break here for a little bit? And what about this soda bottle? This much blood. Imagine next time you get a soda bottle like this, pour it out and just see if that was all blood. Would you stop fighting at that point if you lost that much blood? In order to faint from loss of blood, now again, this has to do with body size and male and female and all sorts of variables, but on average, you need to lose 2 liters of blood in order to faint from loss of blood. That's a remarkable amount of blood that you lost. And yet these guys, they just keep going until they finally can't go anymore.
Well, and I think it's important that Helaman talked about this because you don't want to get a sense that these soldiers are not really fighting, that they're not lost because they're never really in the battle. They are totally in the battle.
Yeah.
And the
they're
fact
in rough
that
shape.
They're wounded, yeah. They're wounded, and 200, so 10% of the whole army, has fainted because they've lost so much blood.
Yeah, and have you ever, twisted your ankle and decided, well, I got to sit out and put my leg up for a few days? And, these guys are getting absolutely beat to pieces and losing all this blood, and yet they keep doing their duty, which is remarkable.
Going on. Verse 26, and now their preservation was astonishing to our whole army, yea, that they should be spared while there was 1,000 of our brethren who were slain. And we do justly ascribe it to the miraculous power of God, because of their exceeding faith, in which they had been taught to believe that there was a just God, and whosoever did not doubt, that they should be preserved by his marvelous power. Now this was the faith of these of whom I have spoken. They are young, and their minds are firm, and they do put their trust in God continually.
Fantastic.
There was a neat quote that I found in the Institute manual from President Gordon B. Hinckley. This was actually from a church news reporting on September 21st, 1996. The article was called Prophet Grateful for Gospel Testimony. The reporter quotes President Hinckley this way, quote, "You reflect this church in all you think, in all you say, and in all you do," President Hinckley told the youth. "Be loyal to the church and kingdom of God." President Hinckley told the youth that they are out there as the sons of Helaman in a world that is full of destructive influences. But if you put your trust in the Almighty and follow the teachings of this church and cling to it, notwithstanding your wounds, you will be preserved and blessed and magnified and made happy. Speaking of the world in which they live, President Hinckley told the youth, "You're in the midst of Babylon. The adversary comes with great destruction. Stand above it. You are the noble birthright. Stand above it." End quote.
Inspiring.
Love that. It is. And the example of these stripling warriors exemplifies that. It doesn't matter the size of the army that's coming at them or their ferociousness.
Yep.
They know that they are essentially weapons of God at this point.
Well, and what's interesting to me about their situation as well, if we translate their physical experience to a spiritual one, they know in whom they have trusted. And even though hardships will come upon them, many of them will have serious injuries. There are some who have passed out from loss of blood, 200 of them. They've gone through a lot of hardships. And yet, God will preserve them. We're here in this life. We're going to go through all of these hardships. What do we do about it? How do we react to it? And what does it lead us to become? So even when terrible things happen, they didn't stand back and went, well, hey, I believed in God. How come I lost a leg? Or whatever the situation was. They know that in the end, they will be saved by the marvelous power of God. And that applies to us in a wonderful spiritual sense in the same way it applied to them physically. Well, let's find out what happened. Remember, we have this group that was supposed to be taking prisoners to Zarahemla, and all of a sudden they come back the next day and, what happened? Well, Helaman didn't have time to talk to Gid, who was the chief captain. This is verse 28. But he gives them the story. So here he is commanding the Nephite forces. He's taking the Lamanite prisoners to Zarahemla. And while they're there, Nephite spies come running up and report. And this is where, did these guys just not have enough tact, or what happened? Because they come up and they say, hey, guess what? The Lamanites, they're about to attack Cumeni. Well, all of a sudden, that gets the prisoners all riled up. Because the Lamanites are thinking, wow, all right, our brothers are coming to attack there, so we can attack here. And they grab sticks and clubs or whatever they can get their hands on, and they start attacking them, running upon their swords. They break through, and they flee. Well, imagine you're Gid, and you're thinking, why would this happen? We're on the Lord's errand. We're doing the Lord's thing. We're taking these prisoners to Zarahemla, and all of a sudden it all falls apart. Gid didn't understand the purposes of the Lord, if he felt that. And if I was him, I would have felt that. So they run back to help at Cumeni, and they save the day. Because of Gid's men, they were able to be preserved. It's amazing sometimes in our lives how we don't always see the big picture. We only look at the little event. Oh, why did this happen to me? Why did this terrible thing happen? We're fighting the Lord's fight. Why didn't? And yet the Lord knows what he's doing. And we see that playing out right here. They came back. They thought something terrible had happened and the prisoners escaping, but they were able to come back and do great good and fulfill the Lord's purposes.
Well, and in further contrast, if you think about it, the Nephites took prisoners. Okay, they didn't want to be men of blood. But what happened when these Lamanite prisoners got all riled up?
Yeah, they
forced them. The Nephites ended up killing many of them.
Well, and they said running upon their swords. I'm sure they're holding their swords out saying, stay back, stay back. And yeah, what else can you do?
And so it says the greater number of them, so I would assume more than half, ended up being killed. Well, that wasn't their intention.
Right.
They wanted to just take them as prisoners.
Yeah.
They were doing what they should have done. Why would this happen?
Yeah. Of course, the Lamanites used their agency in that situation as well.
Absolutely. Well, and again, it's just all about the bigger picture.
Yeah.
And there needs to always be trust in those who see that bigger picture, most notably the Lord.
Right.
So going on to chapter 58. Welcome to chapter 58. So the next target of the Nephites is Manti. Now we've got to reclaim Manti.
Yeah, and that's the last. I think they've got all the other cities. Manti's the last one to get.
So they first try to decoy the Lamanites out so that they can fight them fairly on the plain. That doesn't work. They seem to have learned their lesson from previous attempts. The Lamanites are too numerous to attack in their fortifications, so the Nephites decide to focus on maintaining the cities they've already reclaimed and wait for further aid from Zarahemla. And they made sure to send an embassy to Zarahemla to explain the situation and ask for more men and provisions. The Lamanites are receiving more men and provisions every day. So this is starting to make the Nephites a little nervous. The Lamanites have staged several attacks by stratagem, but the Nephites would not come to battle while the Lamanites were in their strongholds. So in other words, they tried to coax the Nephites to battle them in their strongholds, and they wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
So after many months, now they're starting to worry about starving. Finally, food arrives, along with a small army of 2,000 men, but that's it. And they don't know why more men and provision haven't been sent.
Well, and keep in mind, at this point before, when Helaman arrived, they were just trying to maintain Judea. Now they've recaptured all these other cities, and they've got to maintain those too. So what's going on? So let's take a look in verse 10. And while you're listening to Helaman talk about this, remember, this is still the letter to Moroni. You recognize that they're in a tough situation, and they're not receiving the support that they feel like they should be.
So what do they do in that circumstance?
Right. So in verse 10, therefore, we did pour out our souls in prayer to God, that he would strengthen us. So here it is, not changing the circumstance, but make them more powerful to handle the circumstance that they're in. And deliver us out of the hands of our enemies, yea, and also give us strength that we might retain our cities and our lands and our possessions for the support of our people. Yea, and it came to pass that the Lord our God did visit us with assurances that he would deliver us. Yea, insomuch that he did speak peace to our souls, and did grant unto us great faith, and did cause that we should hope for our deliverance in him. What an example. Make us powerful. Help us that we can be strong and not fall to our enemies. And then, has this happened to you when you've prayed for that you've received a quiet assurance that things would be okay, even if you didn't know how?
Did the Lord speak peace to your soul?
That he would deliver you.
There's a quote in the Institute manual that I really liked. This is from Elder Dennis E. Simmons of the 70. This was in April 1997 General Conference. He says, quote, "If all the world is crumbling around us, the promised Comforter will provide his peace as a result of true discipleship. We can have his peace with us irrespective of the troubles of the world. His peace is that peace, that serenity, that comfort spoken to our hearts and minds by the Comforter, the Holy Ghost, as we strive to follow him and keep his commandments. Just as Helaman discovered in the midst of battle that he did speak peace to our souls, all sincere seekers can have that same peace spoken to them. That peace comes from the assurances spoken by a still, small voice." End quote.
Absolutely true. And when you're in this situation as they are, what if the Lord commanded you or inspired you to do something that you know isn't going to work? For example, they've tried to coax the Lamanites out of their strongholds. It doesn't work. They're not going to fall for it.
And the Lamanites have tried to trick them into attacking them in their strongholds.
Right.
The Nephites.
Nobody's falling for it. So let's take a look at what happens in the rest of the chapter.
So starting in verse 13, the Nephite forces, small though they are, camp on the wilderness side of Manti, preparing to attack the city. The Lamanite spies discover the small size of the force, and the Lamanites are concerned that this small band might try to keep them from getting more soldiers and provisions. They might try a siege or something like this. So they decide to prepare an attack and assume that they can easily succeed. This is a small force. We can take this.
There's no way
problem.
they would fall for this. No
Yeah.
way. This has got to be the Lord's doing.
So Helaman commands Gid and Teomner, each with a small band of men, to hide themselves in the wilderness. Gid on the right, Teomner on the left. And so Helaman remains with the rest of the troops, and the Lamanites attack. So as the Lamanites attack, Helaman commands his forces to run away into the wilderness. And of course, the Lamanites follow them because they can obviously get rid of them. There's no problem here. But they only left a few guards back in Manti.
Yeah, they sent almost their whole army after him.
Yep. And evidently they were not aware, by design, that Gid and Teomner were hiding in the wilderness. And so they passed Gid and Teomner. Gid and Teomner come out of hiding, make sure that they cut off the Lamanite spies so that they can't inform Manti or anyone else, and they invade Manti, overpowering the guards that are left behind, and now they've conquered it.
Well, can you imagine? The Lamanite army runs past, Gideon and Tiamner have got to be looking at each other saying, there's no way. I can't believe they fell for this.
So the Lamanite army keeps chasing Helaman and then realizes that Helaman's forces are headed towards Zarahemla. They're afraid. They assume that they are being led into some kind of trap, and so they retreat. They go back to Manti, but they've been marching so long that they couldn't make it all the way back to Manti before it was night, so they camp and they sleep. And while they're asleep, Helaman and his army, quietly I would assume, march past the Lamanite army so that they can get to Manti before them.
And I like that it mentions at the end of 25 that the Lamanites took no thought for the city of Manti.
Right.
You know?
They just assumed, we already had it. It was our stronghold. Why
Sure.
would there be a problem?
Yeah, we left Billy and Frank in charge. I'm sure they're going to be fine.
And so the next day, the Lamanite forces arrive at Manti and are, quote, astonished exceedingly to find that the Nephites have taken it over and are prepared to meet them.
Yeah.
So they're afraid and they just run into the wilderness.
Yeah. And he points out that they took the city back without the shedding of any blood. That's impossible. They tried that before. It's never worked since. And they don't have the soldiers. The Nephites don't. And yet they pray to their Lord. The Lord gives them assurances. And what? He has them do a plan that shouldn't have worked.
Probably very similar to something that they've already tried.
Exactly. I mean, they already did that with the 2000 by Antipara. So it shouldn't have worked. It worked, and nobody's blood was shed. Nobody got killed, and the entire city came back into their hands. That's a miracle.
So now Helaman has successfully reclaimed all the cities in that portion of the land, in that western area, and expelled the Lamanites. But the Lamanites took many women and children as prisoners. And that's one of the things that was important for Helaman to report back to Moroni. So Helaman finishes his epistle and make sure that he expresses his concern to Moroni about their situation. They've succeeded, but they don't know if they can hold it. Verse 32, but behold, our armies are small to maintain so great a number of cities and so great possessions. But behold, we trust in our God, who has given us victory over those lands, insomuch that we have obtained those cities and those lands which were our own. Now we do not know the cause that the government does not grant us more strength, neither do those men who came up unto us know why we have not received greater strength. Behold, we do not know but what ye are unsuccessful, and ye have drawn away the forces into that quarter of the land. If so, we do not desire to murmur. And if it is not so, behold, we fear that there is some faction in the government, that they do not send more men to our assistance, for we know that they are more numerous than that which they have sent. But behold, it mattereth not. We trust God will deliver us, notwithstanding the weakness of our armies, yea, and deliver us out of the hands of our enemies. That's an interesting thing there, that in verse 35, Helaman specifies that we do not desire to murmur.
Yeah.
There was a quote that I found in the Institute manual from Elder Neil A. Maxwell, and I've read it before, but I guess it never really struck me. But this one is from a Brigham Young University devotional fireside speeches collection from 1985, 1986. It's a talk called A Choice Seer, where Elder Neil A. Maxwell says, quote, in a happy day ahead, they that murmured shall learn doctrine. And he's quoting Isaiah there. This suggests that doctrinal illiteracy is a significant cause of murmuring among church members. End quote. I saw that and I thought, yep, in every experience I have had with people who are critical of the church, it typically boils down to doctrinal illiteracy. And the opposite is going on now with Helaman, right? We have strength and understanding in doctrine, and they are pleading unto the Lord. And thus he has no desire to murmur. Hey, if you've drawn all our forces into the east portion of the land because you need them, we don't want to complain.
Yeah.
But we're worried that we may not be able to continue supporting these lands that we've conquered.
You know, a lot of times nobody wants to think that they're a murmurer, but we do commonly in the church. We have things we don't understand that we get murmury. And this is a great reminder to each of us. Maybe it's not our situation which is causing our murmuring. Maybe we need to look more carefully at whether we understand doctrine correctly.
You know, I think one of the grand takeaway lessons from this whole episode, and you tell me differently at the end of the episode if you think this way, but I think one of the key messages of this whole lesson is there might be more information than you have.
Yeah.
So be careful about making rash judgments.
Yeah.
There might be more to understand here than you realize. That kind of comes up again and again.
Interesting.
And so now Helaman closes his epistle. Verse 41, "And now, my beloved brother Moroni, may the Lord our God, who has redeemed us and made us free, keep you continually in his presence. Yea, and may he favor this people, even that ye may have success in obtaining the possession of all that which the Lamanites have taken from us, which was for our support. And now, behold, I close mine epistle. I am Helaman, the son of Alma." So 3 chapters, but that's Helaman's epistle to Moroni.
A lot going on.
Yep.
So we just covered a lot of information, and if you could give me just 2 minutes, let me review what happened in these last few years and demonstrate where and when of the events. Quick overview. In the 26th year, once it is discovered that Amalickiah is dead, Ammoron, his brother, is made king of the Lamanites. He departs the battlefront on the east and travels to the land of Nephi to report the death to the queen. Then he launches an attack toward the West Sea south of the Nephite lands. After dealing with the kingmen in the land of Zarahemla, Moroni sends 6,000 troops to Teancum in the east and instructions on conducting the war in those lands. Captain Moroni then travels to the west to establish armies to protect the borders on the west and south. He then begins his journey to help Teancum in the east. After Moroni left the west, intrigue and dissensions among the Nephites lead to the loss of a number of cities to the Lamanites, and in this dangerous circumstance, Helaman is compelled to action and soon arrives in Judea with 2,000 stripling warriors of the people of Ammon to assist Antipas, the leader of the western forces. In the 27th year, more supplies arrive to help in the west, which makes the Lamanites very nervous, and as a result, Helaman and his 2,000 are able to lure out the largest army of the Lamanites from Antiparah into a trap where they are defeated by Helaman and Antipas. And by the latter end of this year, Moroni arrives on the eastern battlefront. In the 28th year, Moroni holds a council of war and carries out a plan to lure the Lamanites out of Mulek and defeat them and reclaim the city. Meanwhile, in the west, Ammoron requests an exchange with Helaman, Lamanite prisoners in exchange for the city of Antiparah. Helaman declines and Antiparah surrenders anyway. In the 29th year, Ammoron requests a prisoner exchange with Captain Moroni, which he refuses, hatching a daring plan instead to take back the Nephite prisoners and reclaim the city of Gid. He is successful. Meanwhile, Helaman receives 6,000 more men, plus 60 young Ammonites and supplies. He is able to take back Cumeni and eventually Manti, successfully driving the Lamanites out of that portion of the land. But he needs more troops and supplies to keep the land safe, so he sends an epistle to Moroni in the 30th year. And that is how that all fits together.
So chapter 59, welcome to chapter 59, Moroni rejoices at Helaman's epistle. And why wouldn't he? He succeeded. You know?
Yeah.
Great news.
And so faithful.
And he tells the troops in the east portion so that they can rejoice too, and that will inspire them.
Can you imagine how exciting it would be for him to share the stories of, say, the 2,000 stripling warriors, and maybe they know Chief Captain Gid or Antipas, and get to hear their stories?
Maybe they have family in that portion of the land, and they've been worried about whether they've been able to reclaim those cities. And this is great news. So Moroni sends an epistle to Pahoran to send more men and provisions to help Helaman maintain the cities that they've reclaimed. Okay, so he's making sure that he reinforces Helaman's message to Zarahemla. Hey, they need help. So While Moroni is preparing for war, the people of Nephihah are attacked by the Lamanite army that was expelled from Manti. Remember the ones that came back to Manti only to find that the Nephites had taken it over and then they ran away into the wilderness? Well, they found their way to Nephihah and attacked it.
Yeah. In verse 11, now when Moroni saw that the city of Nephihah was lost, he was exceedingly sorrowful, and began to doubt because of the wickedness of the people, whether they should not fall into the hands of their brethren. Now this was the case with all his chief captains. They doubted and marveled also because of the wickedness of the people, and this because of the success of the Lamanites over them. And it came to pass that Moroni was angry with the government because of their indifference concerning the freedom of their country.
So this goes along with what Hugh Nibley was saying earlier in the episode. These people, Moroni and his chief captains, understood that their problem wasn't the Lamanites. To quote the famous line, "We have met the enemy and he is us."
Yeah. So with Moroni understanding that, and when Helaman talked about that faction, he doesn't know if there isn't a faction in the government that's causing these problems. Remember last week, we had to deal with the kingmen. Now, the hope was that the kingmen had been subdued, but maybe not.
Well, and it's interesting to me that Helaman appears to have gotten a little bit of inspiration to explain what may be going on. It may be that the Spirit is communicating to him, there are some people that are rebelling inside.
Yeah.
Maybe you should consider that as a possibility.
Yep. Well, which brings us to chapter 60.
And welcome to chapter 60.
Yes, welcome. We have less to say about these coming chapters as we do to just celebrate them. So let's jump in to the letter that Moroni, and how amazing is this that we get the letter that Moroni sent to Pahoran. We get to read it. That is amazing to me. And let's take a look at what we learn about his character from this letter. Behold, I direct mine epistle to Pahoran in the city of Zarahemla, who is the chief judge and the governor over the land, and also to all those who have been chosen by this people to govern and manage the affairs of this war. For behold, I have somewhat to say unto them by the way of condemnation. For behold, ye yourselves know that ye have been appointed to gather together men, and arm them with swords and with scimitars and all manner of weapons of war of every kind, and send forth against the Lamanites in whatsoever parts they should come into our land. And now, behold, I say unto you that myself, and also my men, and also Helaman and his men, have suffered exceedingly great sufferings, yea, even hunger, thirst, and fatigue, and all manner of afflictions of every kind. But behold, were this all we had suffered, we would not murmur, nor complain. But behold, great has been the slaughter among our people. Yea, thousands have fallen by the sword, while it might have been otherwise, if ye had rendered unto our armies sufficient strength and succor for them. Yea, great has been your neglect towards us. And now behold, we desire to know the cause of this exceedingly great neglect. Yea, we desire to know the cause of your thoughtless state. Can you think to sit upon your thrones in a state of thoughtless stupor, while your enemies are spreading the work of death around you? Yea, while they are murdering thousands of your brethren. Yea, even they who have looked up to you for protection, yea, have placed you in a situation that ye might have succored them. Yea, ye might have sent armies unto them, to have strengthened them, and have saved thousands of them from falling by the sword. But behold, this is not all. Ye have withheld your provisions from them, insomuch that many have fought and bled out their lives because of their great desires which they had for the welfare of this people. Yea, and this they have done when they were about to perish with hunger, because of your exceedingly great neglect towards them. And now, my beloved brethren, for ye ought to be beloved, yea, and ye ought to have stirred yourselves more diligently for the welfare and the freedom of this people. But behold, ye have neglected them, insomuch that the blood of thousands shall come upon your heads for vengeance. Yea, for known unto God were all their cries, and all their sufferings. Behold, could ye suppose that ye could sit upon your thrones, and because of the exceeding goodness of God ye could do nothing, and he would deliver you? Behold, if ye have supposed this, ye have supposed in vain. Do ye suppose that because so many of your brethren have been killed, it is because of their wickedness? I say unto you, if ye have supposed this, ye have supposed in vain. For I say unto you, there are many who have fallen by the sword, and behold, it is to your condemnation. For behold, the Lord suffereth the righteous to be slain, that his justice and judgment may come upon the wicked. Therefore ye need not suppose that the righteous are lost because they are slain. But behold, they do enter into the rest of the Lord their God. And now behold, I say unto you, I fear exceedingly that the judgments of God will come upon this people, because of their exceeding slothfulness, yea, even the slothfulness of our government, and their exceedingly great neglect towards their brethren, yea, towards those who have been slain. For were it not for the wickedness which first commenced at our head, we could have withstood our enemies, that they would have gained no power over us. Yea, had it not been for the war which broke out among ourselves, yea, were it not for these kingmen who caused so much bloodshed among ourselves, yea, at the time we were contending among ourselves, if we had united our strength, as we hitherto have done. Yea, had it not been for the desire of power and authority which those kingmen had over us, had they been true to the cause of our freedom, and united with us, and gone forth against our enemies, instead of taking up their swords against us, which was the cause of so much bloodshed among ourselves, yea, if we had gone forth against them in the strength of the Lord, we should have dispersed our enemies, for it would have been done according to the fulfilling of his word. But behold, now the Lamanites are coming upon us, taking possession of our lands, and they are murdering our people with the sword, yea, our women and our children, and also carrying them away captive, causing them that they should suffer all manner of afflictions, and this because of the great wickedness of those who are seeking for power and authority, yea, even those kingmen. But why should I say much concerning this matter? For we know not but what ye yourselves are seeking for authority. We know not but what ye are also traitors to your country. Or is it that ye have neglected us because ye are in the heart of our country, and ye are surrounded by security, that ye do not cause food to be sent unto us, and also men to strengthen our armies? Have ye forgotten the commandments of the Lord your God? Yea, have ye forgotten the captivity of our fathers? Have ye forgotten the many times we have been delivered out of the hands of our enemies? Or do ye suppose that the Lord will still deliver us, while we sit upon our thrones, and do not make use of the means which the Lord has provided for us? Yea, will ye sit in idleness, while ye are surrounded with thousands of those, yea, and tens of thousands, who do also sit in idleness, while there are thousands round about in the borders of the land, who are falling by the sword, yea, wounded and bleeding? Do ye suppose that God will look upon you as guiltless, while ye sit still and behold these things? Behold, I say unto you, nay. Now I would that ye should remember that God has said that the inward vessel shall be cleansed first, and then shall the outer vessel be cleansed also. And now except ye do repent of that which ye have done, and begin to be up and doing, and send forth food and men unto us, and also unto Helaman, that he may support those parts of our country which he has regained, and that we may also recover the remainder of our possessions in these parts. Behold, it will be expedient that we contend no more with the Lamanites, until we have first cleansed our inward vessel, yea, even the great head of our government. And except ye grant mine epistle, and come out and show unto me a true spirit of freedom, and strive to strengthen and fortify our armies, and grant unto them food for their support. Behold, I will leave a part of my freemen to maintain this part of our land, and I will leave the strength and the blessings of God upon them, that none other power can operate against them, and this because of their exceeding faith and their patience in their tribulations. And I will come unto you. And if there be any among you that has a desire for freedom, yea, if there be even a spark of freedom remaining, behold, I will stir up insurrections among you, even until those who have desires to usurp power and authority shall become extinct. Yea, behold, I do not fear your power, nor your authority, but it is my God whom I fear. And it is according to his commandments that I do take my sword to defend the cause of my country. And it is because of your iniquity that we have suffered so much loss. Behold, it is time, yea, the time is now at hand, that except ye do bestir yourselves in the defense of your country and your little ones, the sword of justice doth hang over you. Yea, and it shall fall upon you and visit you even to your utter destruction. Behold, I wait for assistance from you, and except ye do administer unto our relief, behold, I come unto you, even in the land of Zarahemla, and smite you with the sword, insomuch that ye can have no more power to impede the progress of this people in the cause of our freedom. For behold, the Lord will not suffer that ye shall live and wax strong in your iniquities to destroy his righteous people. Behold, can you suppose that the Lord will spare you and come out in judgments against the Lamanites when it is the tradition of their fathers that has caused their hatred? Yea, and it has been redoubled by those who have dissented from us, while your iniquity is for the cause of your love of glory and the vain things of the world. Ye know that ye do transgress the laws of God, and ye know that ye do trample them under your feet. Behold, the Lord hath said unto me, if those whom ye have appointed your governors do not repent of their sins and iniquities, ye shall go up to battle against them. And now, behold, I, Moroni, am constrained according to the covenant which I have made to keep the commandments of my God. Therefore I would that ye should adhere to the word of God, and send speedily unto me of your provisions, and of your men, and also to Helaman. And behold, if ye will not do this, I come unto you speedily. For behold, God will not suffer that we should perish with hunger. Therefore he will give unto us of your food, even if it must be by the sword. Now see that ye fulfill the word of God. Behold, I am Moroni, your chief captain. I seek not for power, but to pull it down. I seek not for honor of the world, but for the glory of my God, and the freedom and welfare of my country. And thus I close mine epistle.
Whew. I'd hate to portray the guy who was on the receiving end of that epistle. Oh, wait.
Yikes.
It's my turn to read.
Yes, it is. And guys, you know, as raw as that is, you can feel his intentions. He just wants to help his people.
Moroni is passionate about freedom, about maintaining their free way of life.
And saving
and anything
lives.
that threatens that is a problem.
Yeah. But he made some very harsh accusations. Let's see how the recipient responds. And now we are in Alma, chapter 61.
I, Pahoran, who am the chief governor of this land, do send these words unto Moroni, the chief captain over the army. Behold, I say unto you, Moroni, that I do not joy in your great afflictions. Yea, it grieves my soul. But behold, there are those who do joy in your afflictions, yea, insomuch that they have risen up in rebellion against me, and also those of my people who are free men, yea, and those who have risen up are exceedingly numerous. And it is those who have sought to take away the judgment seat from me that have been the cause of this great iniquity. For they have used great flattery, and they have led away the hearts of many people, which will be the cause of sore affliction among us. They have withheld our provisions, and have daunted our freemen, that they have not come unto you. And behold, they have driven me out before them, And I have fled to the land of Gideon, with as many as it were possible that I could get. And behold, I have sent a proclamation throughout this part of the land, and behold, they are flocking to us daily, to their arms in the defense of their country and their freedom, and to avenge our wrongs. And they have come unto us insomuch that those who have risen up in rebellion against us are set at defiance, yea, insomuch that they do fear us, and durst not come out against us to battle. They have got possession of the land, or the city of Zarahemla. They have appointed a king over them, and he hath written unto the king of the Lamanites, in the which he hath joined an alliance with them, in the which alliance he hath agreed to maintain the city of Zarahemla, which maintenance he supposeth will enable the Lamanites to conquer the remainder of the land, and he shall be placed king over this people, when they shall be conquered under the Lamanites. And now, in your epistle, you have censured me, but it mattereth not. I am not angry, but do rejoice in the greatness of your heart. I, Pahoran, do not seek for power, save only to retain my judgment seat, that I may preserve the rights and the liberty of my people. My soul standeth fast in that liberty in the which God hath made us free. And now, behold, we will resist wickedness even unto bloodshed. We would not shed the blood of the Lamanites if they would stay in their own land. We would not shed the blood of our brethren if they would not rise up in rebellion and take the sword against us. We would subject ourselves to the yoke of bondage if it were requisite with the justice of God, or if he should command us so to do. But behold, he doth not command us that we shall subject ourselves to our enemies, but that we should put our trust in him, and he will deliver us. Therefore, my beloved brother Moroni, let us resist evil, and whatsoever evil we cannot resist with our words, yea, such as rebellions and dissensions, let us resist them with our swords, that we may retain our freedom, that we may rejoice in the great privilege of our church, and in the cause of our Redeemer and our God. Therefore come unto me speedily, with a few of your men, and leave the remainder in the charge of Lehi and Teancum. Give unto them power to conduct the war in that part of the land, according to the Spirit of God, which is also the Spirit of freedom which is in them. Behold, I have sent a few provisions unto them, that they may not perish until ye come unto me. Gather together whatsoever force ye can upon your march hither, and we will go speedily against those dissenters in the strength of our God, according to the faith which is in us. And we will take possession of the city of Zarahemla, that we may obtain more food to send forth unto Lehi and Teancum. Yea, we will go forth against them in the strength of the Lord, and we will put an end to this great iniquity. And now, Moroni, I do joy in receiving your epistle, for I was somewhat worried concerning what we should do, whether it should be just in us to go against our brethren. But ye have said, except they repent, the Lord hath commanded you that ye should go against them. See that ye strengthen Lehi and Teancum in the Lord. Tell them to fear not, for God will deliver them. Yea, and also all those who stand fast in that liberty wherewith God hath made them free. And now I close mine epistle to my beloved brother Moroni.
I love these guys so much.
They're the best. This is really one of the great treasures of the Book of Mormon.
Absolutely. You know, there's every reason for Pahoran to be offended, for him to be defensive. He's been accused of the worst crimes, and Moroni has no idea what's going on with him. He's suffering all sorts of stuff. And yet Pahoran is as spiritually and emotionally mature as could be. He rejoices in the greatness because he understands Moroni's intention. And can you imagine how Moroni must have felt? I mean, coming off of his letter to receive this letter?
Mm-hmm.
Incredible.
He was taken down a few pegs, but for a good cause.
Oh, I'm sure he was delighted to be taken down a few pegs.
There's a quote from the Come Follow Me manual, and there's also more of this talk in the Institute manual. This is from October 2006 General Conference, Elder David A. Bednar, a great talk. He says, quote, "When we believe or say that we have been offended, we usually mean we feel insulted, mistreated, snubbed, or disrespected, and certainly clumsy embarrassing, unprincipled, and mean-spirited things do occur in our interactions with other people that would allow us to take offense. However, it ultimately is impossible for another person to offend you or to offend me. Indeed, believing that another person offended us is fundamentally false. To be offended is a choice we make. It is not a condition inflicted or imposed upon us by someone or something else. Through the strengthening power of the atonement of Jesus Christ, you and I can be blessed to avoid and triumph over offense. Great peace have they which love thy law, and nothing shall offend them. In some way and at some time, someone in this church will do or say something that could be considered offensive. Such an event will surely happen to each and every one of us, and it certainly will occur more than once. You and I cannot control the intentions or behavior of other people. However, we do determine how we will act. Please remember that you and I are agents endowed with moral agency, and we can choose not to be offended. End quote.
And so well illustrated in this story with these two great men.
Absolutely. Pahoran, as Jay said, had every reason to be affronted by Moroni's words.
Dark
And
accusations.
yet he understood that he didn't know. He didn't know what had been happening in Pahoran's life and where he is at this point.
Yep.
And so they bonded together, and now we're going to see some great action.
And so look at this response after he gets the letter. This is chapter 62 now. In verse 1, and now it came to pass that when Moroni had received this epistle, his heart did take courage, and was filled with exceedingly great joy because of the faithfulness of Pahoran, that he was not also a traitor to the freedom and cause of his country. But he did also mourn exceedingly because of the iniquity of those who had driven Pahoran from the judgment seat, yea, in fine, because of those who had rebelled against their country, and also their God.
You can appreciate Captain Moroni's frustration at this point. If you'll recall last lesson, he thought that he had stomped all this out.
Yep.
This whole kingmen, freemen thing, this was supposed to have been resolved already.
And the fact that it isn't has been leading to the death and suffering of thousands of people, just because certain people want power for themselves. And that he cannot stand. So, let's take a look and summarize some of the events in 62, but I hope you'll all take the opportunity to read it. Moroni begins. They've essentially unleashed Moroni. He takes a small army of men. Why a small army? Because he's going to make it bigger. He leaves Lehi and Teancum, as per the instructions, in charge, and then marches toward Gideon. Now you can see the possible path here on his way to Gideon. On his way, he raises the standard of liberty along the way and adds to his forces. He basically just converts people, if you will, along the way, telling them what's happening, I'm sure, and they come to the call. Thousands heed the call. Moroni then joins his forces with Pahoran, and they march on Zarahemla, attack the forces of Pachus. That's the name of the guy who's the leader of the kingmen. And he does not survive the encounter, as you can imagine. It's kind of like Moroni comes down and just people are drawn to him, and he just sweeps through, cleans house, and then all the kingmen who refuse to take up arms to defend their country are put to death. Captain Moroni, in essence, is saying, enough of this. And that ends the 30th year of the reign of the judges. Now, in verse 11, we move on to the 31st year of the reign of the judges. He sends 6,000 men carrying provisions to Helaman, 6,000 men carrying provisions to the east battlefront with Lehi and Teancum, and Moroni and Pahoran leave a large force, and I love that Pahoran's coming along with him, leave a large force to maintain the city of Zarahemla, and then they take another large force, and they march on Nephihah.
Remember when Alma the Younger was actively fighting in the battles as chief judge?
Yeah.
And we hadn't seen that really since then, but we're seeing it now.
Yeah, we sure are. So on their way, they bump into this army of Lamanites. They capture them, slaying many of them, take their provisions and weapons. And then it's like Captain Moroni doesn't even have time to, do anything with them. He basically conquers them, takes their stuff, tells them to make a covenant of peace. And then he says, okay, go to live with the people of Ammon. Head to Melech. Keep in mind, Melech is right in the heartland. But he sends them right there with this covenant of peace. And they join the people of Ammon. That's remarkable. And that starts a trend coming up. Now, in verses 19 through 29, we're going to talk about the retaking of Nephi-Ha. Moroni wants to attack the Lamanites on the plains, not in their strongholds. He doesn't want to lose all his men going up against those fortifications. The Lamanites aren't going to leave their stronghold for any reason, which is very smart. So at night, and we haven't seen this plan happen before, not in this way, Moroni spies out, and apparently this is Moroni himself, spies out on Nephi-Ha to see where the Lamanite army is camped. Well, they're in the east of the city, near the entrance. Okay.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So Moroni returns with his army and commands that they should prepare ropes, ladders, so that they can let themselves down into the city. Now, this tells us a little something about the fortifications. They don't seem to need the ropes and ladders to get up the fortifications, just to get down on the inside. So with those, we were shown the mounds of dirt and the ditches. It's likely something that is almost a slower ramp up to the top and then more of a drop off on the inside. At least that's how I read this. So Moroni's army lets themselves down inside the city, but they're on the west side, on the opposite side of where the Lamanite army is. The Lamanites wake up the next morning to find a Nephite army inside the city. They were, quote, they were affrighted exceedingly, unquote, and they flee out of the city. Moroni sends his army to chase after them, slaying many. They surround them. They take prisoners. And the Lamanites that escaped went into the land of Moroni, near the borders by the sea. Nephi-Ha now is conquered without the loss of one soul of the Nephites. But many Lamanites are taken prisoners. And what do they opt to do? Given the choice, they're like, well, could we maybe go to the people of Ammon? They enter into a covenant, join the people of Ammon. What a great system.
Kind of a sweet deal for them, really.
It really is. But take a look at what happens in verse 29. Therefore, all the prisoners of the Lamanites did join the people of Ammon. They had started a trend, and apparently, given the choice, that's where they all would like to go. Now, is this including all the prisoners in the city of Bountiful that they've had over the years? It seems to. They join the people of Ammon. They become this industrious people, tilling the ground, raising flocks and herds. But it says that the Nephites were relieved from a great burden, yea, insomuch that they were relieved from all the prisoners of the Lamanites. This would even include the guards that Laman saved from being killed in Alma 50. Last time we talked about that. And that they were taken prisoners. Well, where do they go? They're going to live with the very people that Laman has been living with. And what an amazing thing. Perhaps they send for their families and they all just become Nephites. What an unforeseen blessing in this war filled with tragedy and death to have so many of their brethren who will have the potential to be saved and become an industrious, good, and a righteous people. That's really very surprising, very exciting. So now we get to verses 30 through 32. We get the reclaiming of our next city. That's Lehi. Moroni takes his forces to Lehi, and the Lamanites see them coming, and they run away. He chases them from city to city. They just keep, they get to the next city. They come upon it. The Lamanites flee until they bump into Lehi and Teancum. And remember, you never want to bump into Lehi and Teancum if you're a Lamanite army.
Ever.
And they run down along the seashore to the land of Moroni. Remember, Moroni is where everybody's been kind of collecting. It's the last holdout for the Lamanites. And that brings us to 33.
That's right. And so now all the Lamanite forces in the Nephite lands, including King Ammoron himself, are gathered in the land of Moroni. And Captain Moroni, Lehi, and Teancum encamp outside the land of Moroni.
Okay, now imagine you're Amaron for a minute. You've got all your forces around you, but you know that outside your camp is Tiancum. How would you sleep that night? I'm going to guess not well.
Well, he did sleep some, I guess. Verse 35, and thus they did encamp for the night. For behold, the Nephites and the Lamanites also were weary because of the greatness of the march. Therefore they did not resolve upon any stratagem in the nighttime, save it were Tiancum. For he was exceedingly angry with Amaron, insomuch that he considered that Amaron and Amalickiah his brother had been the cause of this great and lasting war between them and the Lamanites, which had been the cause of so much war and bloodshed, yea, and so much famine. And it came to pass that Tiancum in his anger did go forth into the camp of the Lamanites, and did let himself down over the walls of the city. And he went forth with a cord from place to place, insomuch that he did find the king, and he did cast a javelin at him, which did pierce him near the heart. But behold, the king did awaken his servants before he died, insomuch that they did pursue Tiancum and slew him.
Okay, just a brief pause there. A lot of people interpret this story different ways. Some people use this as an example of don't let your anger get the best of you. Look what it did to Tiancum. That isn't how I read this. And I'm not, feel free to interpret this as you do. I think Tiancum must have known that Amaron would have been very cautious. I think there's a reason that Tiancum could not get close to Amaron. When he took out Amalickiah, he was right up with Amalickiah. He put the javelin right to him. And here, he had to throw his javelin. I think Amaron must have had guards and distances and every kind of protection he could come up with. My guess is that Tiancum knew this was a one-way trip. And I think that's why he didn't bring anybody else. Remember the first time he brought a servant with him. I think he had a lot of confidence in surprise. There's not going to be a lot of surprise here. And so I would just offer those as my thoughts on that. I think Tiancum was right to be upset at all the horror that had been caused just by the desire for power that this guy had. And so I think he went there figuring it was going to be a one-way trip. He did the best he could, but ultimately he got the job done, but he lost his life in the doing.
In verse 37, now it came to pass that when Lehi and Moroni knew that Tiancum was dead, they were exceedingly sorrowful. For behold, he had been a man who had fought valiantly for his country, yea, a true friend to liberty, and he had suffered very many exceedingly sore afflictions. But behold, he was dead, and had gone the way of all the earth. Now it came to pass that Moroni marched forth on the morrow, and came upon the Lamanites, insomuch that they did slay them with a great slaughter. And they did drive them out of the land, and they did flee, even that they did not return at that time against the Nephites. And thus ended the 31st year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi. And thus they had wars, and bloodsheds, and famine, and affliction, for the space of many years.
And here's the wrap-up. In verse 40, and there had been murders, and contentions, and dissensions, and all manner of iniquity among the people of Nephi. Nevertheless, for the righteous' sake, yea, because of the prayers of the righteous, they were spared. But behold, because of the exceedingly great length of the war between the Nephites and the Lamanites, many had become hardened, because of the exceedingly great length of the war, and many were softened, because of their afflictions, insomuch that they did humble themselves before God, even in the depth of humility.
Isn't that interesting? It's almost as if they had a choice. From the Institute Manual, then Elder Dallin H. Oakes talks about how we can choose to react to our adversity. This is from an Ensign article in July 1998 called Adversity. He says, quote, "Surely these great adversities are not without some eternal purpose or effect. They can turn our hearts to God. Even as adversities inflict mortal hardships, they can also be the means of leading men and women to eternal blessings. Such large-scale adversities as natural disasters and wars seem to be inherent in the mortal experience. We cannot entirely prevent them, but we can determine how we will react to them. For example, the adversities of war and military service, which have been the spiritual destruction of some, have been the spiritual awakening of others. The Book of Mormon describes the contrast, but behold, because of the exceedingly great length of the war between the Nephites and the Lamanites, many had become hardened because of the exceedingly great length of the war, and many were softened because of their afflictions, insomuch that they did humble themselves before God, even in the depths of humility. I read a similar contrast after the devastating hurricane that destroyed thousands of homes in Florida some years ago. A news account quoted two different persons who had suffered the same tragedy and received the same blessing. Each of their homes had been totally destroyed, but each of their family members had been spared death or injury. One said that this tragedy had destroyed his faith. How, he asked, could God allow this to happen? The other said that the experience had strengthened his faith. God had been good to him, he said. Though the family's home and possessions were lost, their lives were spared, and they could rebuild the home. For one, the glass was half empty. For the other, the glass was half full. The gift of moral agency empowers each of us to choose how we will act when we suffer adversity. End quote. I love that.
Doesn't this tie into what Elder Maxwell was saying about murmuring and understanding doctrine?
Right.
It could be that somebody could look at that experience and how they understood doctrine and God's purposes and that kind of thing could have a great influence on how they looked at the event, whether it hardened them or softened them.
This has been an interesting year. This is being recorded in 2020, as most of you know, and we have been dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. This has been very difficult for many people, and there have been deaths related to this disease. How do we react to this? How do we choose to act when things like this come upon us? I would recommend, as many others have, most notably Moses, to choose life.
So I'm sure there's been other opportunities. We're just living through these kinds of challenges today, but how appropriate to read these chapters, sometimes called the war chapters. They're a fantastic example of how can you stay righteous and positive when the worst kind of situation is around you, when you're facing the darkest kinds of challenges. How do you remain true to the Lord? And these chapters, to me, are a fantastic example of that.
Absolutely.
Well, okay, so let's take a look at finally some happy news here, starting in verse 42. Everything's peaceful.
Yay!
Yay! After fortifying the most vulnerable areas of the land against the Lamanites, Moroni goes home. And Helaman goes home. Moroni retires as the captain, and he gives the command of the Nephite armies over to his son, Moronihah.
There's an interesting thing with that name. I've always seen that as, well, okay, this is an interesting insight perhaps into the Nephite language, that perhaps the suffix ha would indicate the son of. In this case, you have Moroni and Moronihah, who is the son of Moroni. It's very similar to like Nordic surnames like Peterson to be son of Peter or Anderson to be the son of Andrew. This could be the case, but I actually came across an interesting article in the Journal of Book of Mormon Studies, Volume 18, Number 1, Article 14. We'll put a link up, from Paul Y. Hoskisson, which challenges that theory. It's an article called, "It is Okay Not to Have Every Answer, the Book of Mormon Onomastic Ending Iha." So if you're interested in some scholarly debate about that type of thing, it's pretty good. We'll put a link up.
Fantastic. Pehoran also comes home He returns to his judgment seat, takes on his responsibilities. Helaman and his brethren take on their responsibilities, preaching the gospel, bringing many people to repentance. They prosper. The Nephites begin to prosper and become exceedingly rich.
Oh, no.
But they are not lifted up to pride. They remembered the Lord their God. Isn't that great?
Whew.
Oh.
Wow, close one.
All right, so that's the 35th year, and we lose Helaman in the 35th year of the reign of the judges. Helaman dies. So we've ended now what we've been calling the book of First Helaman.
Well, that's true, because the author is now dead.
Uh-huh. So even though we're still in Alma, remember Alma left, and now Helaman was the writer, and now Helaman is passed on, and things are passed on to others.
Mm-hmm. And we don't know necessarily who's finishing this last chapter. We learn in chapter 63, we'll start at verse 1, and it came to pass in the commencement of the 36th year of the reign of the judges over the people of Nephi that Shiblon took possession of those sacred things which had been delivered unto Helaman by Alma. And he was a just man, and he did walk uprightly before God, and he did observe to do good continually, to keep the commandments of the Lord his God, and also did his brother. Now, I want to take just a moment to pause on that. So, the sacred items that were trusted to Helaman from Alma are now trusted to Helaman's brother Shiblon. Remember him from chapter 38?
Yep, good guy.
We don't get a whole lot of information about Shiblon, but we get a real burst here in verse 2. I would submit that and he was a just man, and he did walk uprightly before God, and he did observe to do good continually, to keep the commandments of the Lord his God. That's Shiblon.
I expect.
And then that last line, and also did his brother. Now, he has two brothers that we know of, Helaman, who is dead, and Corianton, who was the problem child from Alma 39 to 42. Looks like he repented and cleaned up his act. Good for him.
Yeah, well, and what a great description. So we were wondering about who's taken over the record here. We'd have to jump to the last verse in the chapter. It will let us know that Shiblon is the one who's writing this last chapter.
Okay. So Moroni dies now in the 36th year of the reign of the judges. So if he were 25 when he was introduced in Alma 43, in the 18th year of the reign of the judges, he would be 43 now when he died. If he were appointed earlier than that, at most, he's 50. So he's still pretty young. He has put in so much for the defense of his country. And I'm reminded of a great line from Dr. Henry Jones Jr. from his documentary, Raiders of the Lost Ark. Quote, "It's not the years, it's the mileage."
Yeah, well, Moroni put in the mileage for
Absolutely.
sure.
There's no question.
Well, there's an interesting little thing that happened here as well in Alma 63. Starting in verse 4, we're introduced to some travels. Now, people seem to be moving into the land northward, departing out of Zarahemla, and kind of establish. You remember we talked about that narrow pass and the land northward, and that was a strategic area that they were really fortifying against the enemies of the Nephites. Well, now we've got a number of Nephites, just like with the East Wilderness, filling that in so that it would keep it safe from the Lamanites. Now we've got a group of people, I think, in that same way that are going to the land northward. But in order to get there, you need to travel landward, probably on the east side, into the land northward. But we're introduced now to somebody who wants to travel to the land northward using a different route. In verse 5, it came to pass that Haggath, he being an exceedingly curious man, therefore he went forth and built him an exceedingly large ship on the borders of the land Bountiful by the land Desolation, and launched it forth into the West Sea by the narrow neck which led into the land northward. And behold, there were many of the Nephites who did enter therein, and did sail forth with much provisions, and also many women and children, and they took their course northward. And thus ended the 37th year. Now, what's interesting, and I'm not sure why, maybe it was the ease of travel up the waterway up on the west coast, but most travel seems to be on the east coast into the land northward. But he wanted to go up, for whatever reasons, the west coast. So with the end of that, in the 38th year, this man built other ships. And the first ship did also return, and many more people did enter into it. And they also took much provisions and set out again to the land northward. And it came to pass that they were never heard of more. And we suppose that they were drowned in the depths of the sea. And it came to pass that one other ship also did sail forth, and whither she did go, we know not. And it came to pass that in this year there were many people who went forth into the land northward, and thus ended the 38th year. What an interesting little side note and an interesting little adventure. What a curiosity.
And a mystery at that.
Yeah.
We don't know necessarily what happened to these people or where they settled.
Interesting.
So let's finish up our chapter. We have gone on a very long journey, not only in this lesson, but we are finishing the entire book of Alma, where we have been studying for the past several weeks. The 39th year of the reign of the judges, Shiblon dies, and Corianton had left on a ship to the land northward carrying provisions. So this is part of that whole Haggoth-inspired travel. Before his death, Shiblon confers the sacred items to Helaman's son, who is also named Helaman. We can call him Helaman Jr., Helaman the Younger, something, Helaman II. So the writings which have been entrusted with Helaman have been copied and sent forth for all the people to read and study and so on and so forth, except the portion that Alma commanded should be kept secret. Now, if you'll recall, this harkens back to our previous lesson in Alma 45, where near the death of Alma the Younger, Alma makes this prophecy about the end of the Nephites and tells Helaman not to publish this until after the prophecy is fulfilled. So that's what we're talking about.
Right. And again, whether or not it's the death of Alma the Younger or not, we don't know. Dun, dun, dun.
It's true. Now, in verse 14, we learn that there are Nephite dissenters who go to the Lamanites and attempt to stir them up against the Nephites again.
Oh.
Now, we just finished this, guys.
Oh,
we
my
just
gosh.
cleaned this up. Can we have peace for just a few years?
Oh.
Well, so the Lamanites attack, but Moronihah and his army are evidently well prepared and repulse them. And so that's the end of the story.
Wow.
So, it would be nice if really that was what happened at the very beginning, and we wouldn't have had all these long wars and famines and so on and so forth. But Moronihah was evidently well suited for the job and took after his father in protecting his Nephite nation.
Well, in verse 17, and thus ended the account of Alma, and Helaman his son, and also Shiblon, who was his son.
And now it's the end of the 39th year of the reign of the judges. So we're entering the 40th year of the reign of the judges. This is roughly about 53 years BC, and we've finished our journey. What a journey it's been.
These are some great sections, so applicable today. And at the very least, can we take away from this a great example of what we don't want to happen in the world?
Oh, yes.
And how we can help to avoid it.
Absolutely.
Great warnings.
Take some time to talk amongst your family and to take some time for introspection, to think about what are you doing? What are things that you could be reacting better to? Are you offended by something that someone said? Maybe you should choose not to be. We continue to encourage you to read your scriptures. These are wonderful, wonderful verses that we have been going over, and we're so grateful to have shared this first portion of the Book of Mormon with you. We look forward to talking more about the Book of Mormon in our next lesson.
Exciting things ahead. We'll see you then.
This podcast is not officially affiliated with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
But we're really big fans.